With the establishment of the 13 British colonies, Great Britain found a lasting way to tap into all that North America had for the taking. Natural resources flowed, feeding Europe's needs. Raw materials grown in colonial America were exported to English factories, where they were turned into manufactured goods. These manufactured goods were then shipped back to the colonies and sold for profit. All three regions, New England, Mid Atlantic, and Southern, were good for Great Britain's swelling economy. Often, when one thinks of New England and its rocky soil, slavery does not come to mind. Yet one needs to look no further than the story of the witch trials in Salem, Massachusetts, to know enslaved people were part of daily life in New England. When 10 Puritan girls began behaving strangely, witchcraft was assumed to be at work. The first accusing finger would be pointed squarely at an enslaved woman called Tituba. The small villages and quaint towns of New England were home to a number of enslaved people. While the rocky soil and smaller farms did not support widespread cash crop plantations, there were rich colonists. And where there were rich colonists, there were enslaved workers. Enslaved people worked in homes as domestic servants, alongside indentured servants on small farms, and often worked as artisans or skilled craftsmen. Overall, the number of enslaved people in the New England colonies was quite small when compared to the Middle and Southern colonies. But make no mistake about it, New Englanders had their hands all over the enslavement of African people. We know tobacco was a major cash crop in the 16 and 1700s, but it was sugar that hit the economic sweet spot in those days. Sugar was grown by enslaved women, men, and children on the hot and steamy islands of the Caribbean. Work within sugar plantations was back-breaking torture. When an enslaved person entered a sugarcane field, the average life expectancy was around 5 years. A planter by the name of Edward Littleton estimated that a sugar planter who owned 100 enslaved people and put them to work growing sugarcane would kill them all within 19 years. Sugar was such a hot-selling raw material that most islands dedicated nearly all available land to growing sugar. With no land left over to grow anything else, the Caribbean islands needed a steady supply of food, wood, livestock, candles, clothing, and more enslaved people. New England merchants were more than willing to step in and take care of the Caribbean's shipping needs. In exchange for all these supplies, New England imported or brought in a sugar product called molasses. It came straight from the plantations of the Caribbean. From this molasses, New Englanders made an alcoholic drink called rum, which was made in a factory called a rum distillery. It has been estimated that half of all ships docking at the busy Boston Harbor in the 1660s and 1670s were either heading to or coming from the sugar-producing islands of the Caribbean. By 1770, the colonies had imported 6 million gallons of molasses, and most of that molasses was turned into rum inside of the 159 distilleries scattered throughout New England. Merchants were stuffing their pockets full with money from sugar production and the enslaved people that grew it. Out of the entire population of enslaved people in the colonies, only about 3% lived and worked in New England. But it should be clearly understood that the New England colonial region was deeply involved in the enslavement of people. Overall, some 4 million enslaved women, children, and men were brought to the Caribbean. Just about all of them ended up on sugar plantations. A British poet named William Cowper once said of enslaved people, "I pity them greatly, but I must be mum, for how could we do without our sugar or rum?" The numbers of enslaved people grew as one headed from New England south into the Middle Colonies. The mild climate of the Middle Colonies, or Mid-Atlantic colonies, offered more opportunities for profitable agriculture. Plantations specialized in producing wheat, barley, and other grains. After all, these were known as the breadbasket colonies. Grains required a shorter growing season when compared to the cash crops of the South. Did this mean enslaved people had time off? Not a chance. Landowners took full advantage of the idle months by making time off pay off. By hiring out or renting their enslaved workers to farmers who could use the help, farmers of the Middle Colonies found yet another opportunity to make money from owning human lives. Enslaved people had no say in any aspect of their lives. If a master wished to rent an enslaved person to another plantation owner, off they went. If a master wished to sell an enslaved person, off they go. Mothers sold away from children, children sold away from mothers. Slavery was a business, and a big one at that. The feelings of the enslaved individuals mattered not. With a larger concentration of enslaved people than in New England, the air was always thick with the threat of rebellion. The Middle Colony of New York created a 1730 law aimed at control. The law made it a crime for any enslaved person to possess or use any gun, pistol, sword, club, or any other kind of weapon. The law also made it illegal for 3 or more enslaved people to meet at any time unless in the servile employment of their master or mistress. Punishments for breaking any law would be violent and public. But when freedom is denied to people, no law can hold everyone down. On April 1st, 1712, a group of enslaved people burned a master's house and shot the slave owners, killing 8, wounding 12. In 1741, also in the Middle Colony of New York, a group of enslaved Africans teamed up with sympathetic whites to burn buildings throughout New York City. All of those involved, and a few who were not, were captured and burned at the stake. Violent and public. Enormous mansions overlooking oceans of sprawling plantations. Hundreds, thousands, and eventually millions of enslaved people working the rich soil from can't see in the morning till can't see at night. And if the moon was full, work may roll on for days. This was slavery, Southern style. Cash crops like rice, tobacco, indigo, and cotton had long growing seasons. They required plenty of heat, loads of sun. The rewards for all this hard work went only to a few, and at the expense of the shattered lives of many. Some of the biggest names in the Southern colonies were neck-deep in the business of slavery. From George Washington, who strolled his Virginia plantation, flashing a smile that was chock full of the teeth of his enslaved workers, to Thomas Jefferson, who claimed ownership of the lives of over 600 African Americans while sitting high upon his Charlottesville plantation. James Madison, Patrick Henry, George Mason. The list goes on of those founding fathers who took ownership over the lives of other human beings and made fortunes from their labor. In 1619, there were 20 and odd enslaved people in the English colony of Virginia. By 1770, there were nearly 700,000, worth $200 million in today's money throughout the English colonies. Although colonial leaders like George Washington and Thomas Jefferson spoke off and on about the inhumanity of slavery, the wealth generated from Southern cash crops would force their actions to drown out their words. The enslavement of people would be a central part of colonial life in all three colonial regions and would be entrenched in both North and South America for many generations to follow.